At some point in life, almost everyone experiences this moment. Someone who used to be part of your daily conversations suddenly becomes distant. Messages become shorter. Replies take longer. Eventually, the connection fades, sometimes without any clear explanation. This experience can feel confusing and even painful. Many people immediately begin searching for a reason. They replay past conversations in their minds, wondering if they said something wrong or missed an important signal. But the truth is that relationships rarely disappear suddenly. What feels like a sudden disappearance is often the final stage of a process that began much earlier. Human relationships are dynamic systems. They shift as people's priorities, identities, and emotional needs change. Sometimes two individuals move through similar phases of life and naturally remain connected. But when life directions begin to diverge, distance slowly grows. One person may begin focusing more on career ambitions, while the other prioritizes personal growth or family responsibilities. Over time, shared experiences become fewer and conversations feel less natural. This gradual shift rarely happens in a dramatic way. Instead, it appears through small signals that are easy to overlook. Conversations become more practical and less personal. Plans are postponed more often. Emotional openness slowly decreases. Because these changes happen gradually, many people do not recognize the transition until the connection has already weakened. Another important factor behind disappearing relationships is emotional energy. Every relationship requires a certain level of emotional investment. When life becomes stressful or overwhelming, people instinctively protect their limited mental resources. They may withdraw from conversations, social obligations, or even close friendships simply because they feel exhausted. In such situations, distance is not always about rejection. It is often about self-preservation. People rarely explain this process openly because it can feel difficult to articulate. Instead of saying, "I do not have the emotional energy to maintain this connection right now," they simply respond less often or stop initiating contact. From the outside, this behavior can appear cold or confusing, but internally it often reflects a struggle to manage personal stress. Another psychological dynamic involves identity change. As individuals grow, their sense of identity evolves. Interests shift, values develop. New experiences reshape how people see the world. When this transformation happens at different speeds between two individuals, their conversations may begin to feel unfamiliar. Topics that once created excitement may no longer resonate in the same way. The connection does not necessarily end because of conflict, but because the shared psychological space between the two people becomes smaller. This can be especially common during periods of major life transition, such as career changes, relocation, or personal development journeys. In these moments, people often redefine who they are and what kinds of relationships feel aligned with that identity. Some friendships naturally adapt to these changes and grow stronger. Others slowly fade because the emotional rhythm that once sustained them no longer exists. Another subtle reason people disappear involves unspoken expectations. Many relationships operate on implicit agreements about support, communication, and emotional availability. When one person begins expecting more connection than the other is able to provide, tension quietly builds. The individual who feels overwhelmed may withdraw to avoid confrontation, while the other person feels confused by the sudden distance. Because the expectations were never clearly discussed, Neither side fully understands a shift. Silence replaces conversation, and distance gradually replaces familiarity. Social comparison can also influence disappearing relationships. As people grow and evolve, they may begin comparing their progress, lifestyle, or achievements with those around them. Sometimes this comparison creates subtle discomfort. A person might feel insecure when interacting with someone whose life seems very different from their own. Instead of addressing this discomfort directly, they may distance themselves from the relationship entirely. From the outside, the change appears sudden, but internally it reflects a complex emotional response. Finally, there's a reality that some relationships simply complete their natural life cycle. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Certain friendships exist for specific periods of life, offering companionship, support, or shared experience during that time. When the circumstances that brought two people together change, the relationship may gradually dissolve without any dramatic conflict. While this can feel unsettling, it is also a natural part of human social evolution. Just as individuals grow and change, the network of relationships surrounding them also transforms. Understanding this process does not remove the emotional weight of someone disappearing, but it does reveal that such moments are rarely as mysterious as they first appear. Most of the time, the signs were already present, quietly unfolding long before the final silence. When someone disappears from your life, the instinctive reaction is often to interpret it personally. The mind naturally asks questions such as, "What did I do wrong?" Or, "Why was I not important enough for them to stay?" These questions arise because human beings are deeply wired for social connection. Our brains treat relationships as signals of belonging and safety. When a connection fades unexpectedly, the brain interprets that loss almost like a threat to identity. However, psychological research suggests that many disappearing relationships are not about rejection at all. Instead, they reflect the invisible complexity of people's internal lives. Every individual carries private struggles, responsibilities, fears, and aspirations that others may not fully see. At times, these internal experiences reshape a person's priorities in ways that are difficult to communicate outwardly. A friend who once seemed consistently available may suddenly become focused on rebuilding their life after a personal challenge. Someone who used to share every detail of their thoughts may begin turning inward while processing deeper emotional questions. In these periods, maintaining every relationship becomes nearly impossible. The individual must decide where to invest their limited attention and emotional energy. Often this choice is not made consciously or strategically. It emerges gradually as life circumstances change. There is also an important psychological difference between connection and familiarity. Many relationships continue for years simply because they follow established routines. People message each other out of habit. They meet regularly because it has always been part of their schedule. But when routines shift or environments change, familiarity alone may not be strong enough to maintain the bond. Without shared experiences reinforcing the relationship, the connection begins to weaken. This is why friendships formed during specific life contexts, such as school, workplaces, or shared communities, sometimes fade once those environments change. The connection was real, but it was also supported by circumstances that no longer exist. Another factor involves emotional boundaries. As people mature, they often become more aware of which relationships support their well-being and which ones create stress. This awareness can lead to quiet distancing. instead of confronting the issue directly. Some individuals choose to reduce contact gradually. From their perspective, this approach feels less confrontational and therefore more comfortable. But for the other person, the absence of explanation can feel confusing or hurtful. This difference in communication style often contributes to the feeling that someone suddenly disappeared, even though the process unfolded slowly from the other side. It is also important to recognize that not all disappearing relationships reflect a negative change. Sometimes distance occurs because both individuals are evolving in healthy but separate directions. Each person may be exploring new interests, communities, or identities that naturally reshape their social environment. In these situations, the fading connection does not mean the past relationship lacked meaning. Instead, it reflects the reality that personal growth often rearranges the social landscape. Another psychological dimension appears in the way memory interprets past relationships. When a connection fades, the mind tends to focus on its most positive moments. Memories of shared laughter, deep conversations, and emotional support become more vivid. This selective memory can make the disappearance feel even more dramatic because the mind compares the silence of the present with the warmth of the past. But in reality, every relationship contains both closeness and distance over time. What feels like an abrupt ending is often just the final chapter of a much longer emotional narrative. There is also a deeper lesson hidden inside these experiences. When someone leaves your life without explanation, it invites reflection about the nature of connection itself. It reveals that relationships are not fixed structures, but living systems influenced by countless variables. Expectations, timing, emotional readiness, and life circumstances all interact to shape whether a connection continues or fades. Understanding this complexity can reduce the tendency to blame oneself when relationships change. Instead of interpreting distance as personal failure, it becomes possible to see it as part of the natural movement of human lives. People enter and exit each other's stories for many different reasons, some of which may never be fully understood. Accepting this uncertainty can transform how we experience change. Rather than viewing disappearing relationships only as loss, we can also recognize them as transitions. They create space for new connections, new environments, and new versions of ourselves to emerge. In this sense, every fading relationship carries a hidden message about growth. It reminds us that life is constantly evolving, and the social world around us evolves with it. While it may be impossible to prevent every connection from fading, it is possible to carry forward the understanding and experience gained from each relationship. And sometimes, the people who once disappeared may reappear again later in life, meeting us in a completely different chapter where both individuals have changed.